A tech CEO abandoned his pregnant black wife for a 21-year-old intern. He thought he was upgrading his life. Instead, he destroyed it. What happened next will restore your faith in karma and show you exactly what happens when a man mistakes a queen for just another woman he can replace. This isn't just a typical cheating story. This isn't about a woman seeking revenge or trying to destroy her ex-husband's life. This is about something far more powerful. What happens when someone with true class and dignity decides to simply walk away and build something better? By the end of this story, you'll understand why the most devastating thing you can do to someone who betrays you isn't to fight them, it's to outgrow them so completely that they realize what they lost when it's too late to get it back. Welcome back to the channel. Please like, share and subscribe to Touching Boss Stories. If you're new here, we tell stories that matter, stories about real people facing real consequences for their choices. And today's story? It's going to change how you think about heartbreak, dignity, and what it really means to be a queen. Jessica Price at 32 has everything you'd want in a life partner: graceful without being pretentious, loyal without being naive, intelligent without being intimidating. She had this rare quality where she could light up a room just by walking into it, not because she was trying to get attention, but because genuine warmth and kindness have a way of drawing people in. Jessica had been married to Daniel Price for 4 years, and if you'd asked anyone who knew them, they would have told you they were the perfect couple. Daniel was a rising star in the tech world, one of those brilliant, driven entrepreneurs who seemed destined for greatness. At 35, he had just launched his third startup, and this one was different. This one was taking off like a rocket. The company was called Nexus Solutions, and it was revolutionizing how businesses handled data analytics. Within 18 months of launch, they'd gone from Daniel working out of their garage to securing $60 million in Series B funding. The tech blogs were calling Daniel a visionary. Forbes put him on their 30 under 30 list. Investors were throwing money at him so fast he could barely keep up with the meetings. And through it all, Jessica was right there beside him. When he was stressed about investor presentations, she'd stay up with him, helping him practice his pitch. When he was doubting himself, wondering if he was capable of scaling a company this quickly, she'd remind him of all the times he'd already proven everyone wrong. When the pressure was crushing him, she'd be the one to suggest they take a weekend getaway, just the two of them, to reconnect and remember what really mattered. She never asked for credit, never demanded recognition, never complained that his success was built on a foundation that included her emotional labor, her sacrifices, her unwavering belief in him when he didn't even believe in himself. And then came the news that changed everything. Jessica was pregnant. They'd been trying for a year, and when that positive test finally appeared, Daniel cried. Actually cried. He held Jessica in their kitchen, spinning her around, talking about how their child was going to grow up in a world where anything was possible because Daddy was going to build that world for them. Jessica was glowing. I don't mean that in some cliché way. I mean she literally seemed to radiate happiness. She'd already picked out a name, Hope. Hope Jessica Price. She said she wanted their daughter to carry both their names, to always remember that she came from love, from partnership, from two people who chose each other every single day. But as Nexus Solutions exploded, and I mean exploded, going from 60 million to 200 million in valuation in just 6 months, Daniel started changing. Success has a way of doing that to people. It whispers lies in your ear. It tells you that you're special, that normal rules don't apply to you, that you deserve whatever you want whenever you want it. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The business trips stretched longer. When Jessica would call during the day, Daniel's assistant would say he was in meetings. When she'd suggest dinner out, just the two of them, he'd say he was too tired. When she'd try to talk about baby names or nursery colors or any of the million little details that matter when you're creating a life together, he'd seem distracted, already thinking about the next deal, the next opportunity, the next milestone. Jessica, being the woman she was, made excuses for him. The company was in a critical growth phase. This was their shot at building something that would secure their family's future forever. Once things settled down, once the Series C funding closed, once they hired a proper management team, everything would go back to normal. She was 6 months pregnant, showing beautifully, when she found the messages. It was a Tuesday evening. Daniel had forgotten his tablet at home again, and his assistant called asking if Jessica could bring it to the office because he needed it for a presentation the next morning. Of course she said yes. Of course she was happy to help. That's the kind of person Jessica was. She was in the car, tablet on the passenger seat, when a notification popped up. A message. From someone named Sienna. Now, Jessica wasn't the type to snoop. She trusted her husband completely. But when you're 6 months pregnant and your husband has been distant for weeks, and a message pops up from a woman whose name you don't recognize, saying, "Can't wait for tonight," well, even the most trusting wife is going to have questions. Sienna Martinez was 21 years old. A junior at Stanford who'd been hired as a summer intern at Nexus Solutions. Beautiful in that effortless way that young women often are, long dark hair, perfect skin, the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced real heartbreak or disappointment. She was brilliant, ambitious, and apparently, completely comfortable with flirting with her married boss. The messages went back months. They started professional, Sienna asking questions about projects, Daniel offering mentorship and guidance. But somewhere around the time Jessica announced her pregnancy, the tone shifted. Compliments about Sienna's work became compliments about her appearance. Discussions about business strategy became personal conversations that stretched late into the night. And then came the photos. Sienna in her apartment, wearing nothing but one of Daniel's Nexus Solutions t-shirts. Sienna at the company retreat, snuggled up next to Daniel in what was supposed to be a group photo but looked very much like a couple's selfie. Sienna sending heart emojis and inside jokes and messages that made it clear this wasn't just an emotional affair. This was physical, ongoing, and completely shameless. But the message that broke Jessica's heart wasn't sexual or romantic. It was practical. Cold. Businesslike. Once I tell Jessica about us, we can stop sneaking around. I'm tired of pretending you're just my boss when you're so much more than that. Jessica sat in her car in the parking garage of Daniel's office building, 6 months pregnant with his child, reading messages between her husband and a woman who was planning their future together as if Jessica was just an obstacle to be removed. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she drove home, tablet in hand, and waited. Daniel came home at midnight, claiming he'd been in investor meetings. He kissed Jessica on the forehead, the same forehead kiss he'd been giving her for months. She realized, the kind of kiss you give someone you care about but aren't in love with anymore. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Interesting," Jessica replied, handing him his tablet. "You left this." Sienna was worried you'd need it for tomorrow's presentation. Daniel's face went white. Not pale, like all the blood had drained from his body in an instant. "Jessica, I can explain." "Can you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. "Can you explain why you're having an affair with a 21-year-old intern while your wife is carrying your child? Can you explain why you've been lying to me for months? Can you explain why I had to find out about this from messages on your tablet instead of from you?" And here's the part that still makes my blood boil. Daniel didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he said the words that would haunt Jessica for months. "I never meant for you to find out this way. But honestly, Jessica, maybe it's better that you did. This marriage isn't working anymore. We both know it. I've been unhappy for a long time." Unhappy? He'd been unhappy. While Jessica was glowing with pregnancy, supporting his career, building their future together, he'd been unhappy. "I want a divorce," he said as casually as if he was asking her to pass the salt. "I'll make sure you and the baby are taken care of financially, obviously. But I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. Sienna and I, what we have is real. It's what I should have had all along." Jessica looked at her husband, the man she'd loved for 6 years, married for 4, built a life with, and realized she was looking at a stranger. Worse than a stranger. She was looking at a coward who was rewriting history to make himself feel better about his betrayal. "Get out," she said quietly. "Jessica, we should talk about this like adults." "Get out of my house," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "Tonight. Take whatever you need and get out. We'll handle the rest through lawyers." Daniel left that night. Within a week, he'd moved into a downtown penthouse that cost more per month than most people make in a year. And within a month, 1 month, Sienna Martinez had moved in with him. The photos started appearing on social media almost immediately. Daniel and Sienna at expensive restaurants. Daniel and Sienna at company events, her hand possessively on his arm. Daniel and Sienna on vacation in the Maldives, both of them glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from getting away with something you thought you'd never be able to do. Meanwhile, Jessica was alone. 7 months pregnant, alone in the house she'd decorated for a family that no longer existed, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been shattered by a man who'd decided she was disposable. If you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, drop a comment and let me know, because what happened next is going to show you that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's something much more powerful. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what Jessica does next. Here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted completely turned out to be living a double life? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. Now, here's where this story could have gone one of two ways. Jessica could have become bitter. She could have spent her energy trying to destroy Daniel's reputation, expose his affair to his investors, make his life as miserable as he'd made hers. She could have played the victim, posted cryptic social media messages about betrayal, tried to turn their mutual friends against him. A lot of women would have done exactly that. And honestly, they would have been justified. When someone destroys your life while you're carrying their child, when someone rewrites your entire history together to justify their betrayal, when someone replaces you with a younger model like you're a car that's gone out of style, well, anger is a pretty reasonable response. But Jessica didn't choose anger. She chose something much more devastating to a man like Daniel. She chose indifference. She went quiet. Not broken, not defeated, not wallowing in self-pity. Just quiet. Like she was conserving her energy for something more important than fighting a man who wasn't worth fighting for. The first thing she did was hire the best divorce attorney in the city. Not to destroy Daniel, but to protect herself and her unborn daughter. She wanted a clean break, a fair settlement, and ironically, she wanted to make it as easy as possible for Daniel to walk away completely. But because she'd already realized something that would take him years to understand, a man who could abandon his pregnant wife for a college intern wasn't worth keeping. While Daniel was posting pictures of his new life with Sienna, Jessica was quietly building her own empire. See, here's what Daniel had forgotten in his rush to trade up. Jessica wasn't just a pretty face who'd been lucky enough to marry a successful man. She was brilliant in her own right. Before she'd focused on supporting Daniel's career, she'd been a social impact consultant, working with nonprofits and social enterprises to scale their operations and maximize their community impact. But she'd put that on hold when Daniel's company took off. She told herself it was temporary, that once things settled down, she'd get back to her own work. Except things never settled down, and somehow supporting Daniel's dreams had become her full-time job. Now, for the first time in years, she had space to remember who she was before she became half of a couple. Jessica started small. She reached out to her old network, let people know she was available for consulting work again. Word spread quickly, Jessica Price was back, and she was hungry. Organizations that had been trying to reach her for years suddenly had access to one of the most brilliant strategic minds in the nonprofit world. But she didn't just pick up where she'd left off. Pregnancy had changed her perspective on everything. She wasn't just thinking about making a living anymore, she was thinking about making a legacy. What kind of world did she want to leave for her daughter? What kind of example did she want to set? She started specializing in something very specific, helping women-led organizations scale their impact. Female founders, women's rights groups, organizations focused on maternal health and family support. It wasn't just business for Jessica, it was personal. Every nonprofit she helped grow was proof that women could build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. And while she was building her consulting practice, something else was happening. Jessica was becoming the person she was always meant to be. You know how some people seem to glow during pregnancy? Jessica was one of those people, but not in the way you might think. Yes, she was physically beautiful. Pregnancy had given her this serene, almost ethereal quality that made people stop and stare. But there was something deeper happening. Strip away the husband who'd been draining her energy, remove the constant worry about someone else's dreams and goals and ego, and suddenly Jessica had space to shine in ways she'd forgotten were possible. She started appearing on panels about social entrepreneurship. She wrote articles about sustainable impact investing. She joined the boards of 3 different organizations focused on supporting single mothers and women in crisis. And everywhere she went, people noticed her. Not because she was trying to get attention, but because competence and grace and quiet confidence are magnetic in ways that desperation and drama never are. Meanwhile, Daniel was living his best life with Sienna. Or at least, that's what the Instagram post suggested. They were everywhere together: tech conferences, charity galas, company events. Sienna had stepped seamlessly into the role of CEO's girlfriend, and she was clearly enjoying every minute of it. She deferred her senior year at Stanford, claiming she wanted to focus on learning from one of the most innovative minds in tech, which was a pretty way of saying she'd rather be arm candy than earn a degree. For a while, it seemed to be working for both of them. Daniel loved having a young, beautiful, admiring girlfriend who thought everything he said was brilliant. Sienna loved the lifestyle, the access, the feeling of being special because she'd landed the most eligible bachelor in Silicon Valley. But here's the thing about relationships built on infatuation and convenience: they don't have the foundation to withstand real pressure. And Daniel's life was about to get very pressurized. Jessica gave birth to Hope on a rainy Thursday in October. She was alone, not because she didn't have people who would have been there, but because she chose to be alone. This was her moment, her daughter, her new beginning. She didn't want it contaminated by the presence of people who were only there out of obligation or pity. Hope Jessica Price was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair, and her mother's intelligent eyes. When the nurse placed her in Jessica's arms, something shifted in the universe. This wasn't just a woman who'd been abandoned by her husband. This was a mother who would move mountains to give her daughter the world. Daniel sent flowers to the hospital. Expensive ones with a card that said, "Congratulations. She's beautiful. Let me know if you need anything." Like he was a distant relative offering condolences, not the father of the child he'd never bothered to visit. Jessica threw the flowers away and kept the card. Not as a memento, but as a reminder. A reminder of how little this man understood about what he'd lost. The first 2 years of Hope's life were transformative for Jessica in ways that had nothing to do with motherhood and everything to do with finally understanding her own worth. Her consulting business exploded. She wasn't just working with local nonprofits anymore, she was being flown around the country to help major foundations restructure their giving strategies. She developed a methodology for measuring social impact that became the gold standard in the industry. Universities started inviting her to lecture. Corporate boards started recruiting her. But more importantly, she was happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way she couldn't remember being during the last few years of her marriage. She'd wake up in the morning excited about her work, excited about watching Hope discover the world, excited about the life she was building from scratch. She bought a house, not a mansion, but a beautiful Craftsman in a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools and a big backyard where Hope could play. She decorated it exactly the way she wanted, filled it with art from local artists and furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive. It felt like home in a way the house she'd shared with Daniel never had. And she started dating. Not seriously, not looking for another husband, but reminding herself that she was a beautiful, intelligent, accomplished woman who deserved to be cherished. The men who asked her out weren't trying to fix her or save her. They were drawn to her strength, her independence, her joy. Meanwhile, cracks were starting to show in Daniel's perfect new relationship. Sienna was bored. The novelty of being a tech CEO's girlfriend had worn off, and she was realizing that Daniel worked constantly, traveled frequently, and expected her to be available whenever he had time for her but didn't expect him to prioritize her when she needed attention. She started going out without him. A lot. She'd post Instagram stories from clubs and bars, always surrounded by younger, more attractive, more available men. When Daniel would ask about it, she'd accuse him of being controlling, of not trusting her, of being too old and paranoid to understand how young people socialized. But the real problem wasn't Sienna's social life. The real problem was that she was using Daniel's company credit cards to fund a lifestyle that included expensive gifts for other men. It took Daniel's accountant 6 months to figure out what was happening. Sienna wasn't just cheating, she was stealing. She'd been funneling company money to support not one but 2 other relationships, including a 23-year-old personal trainer who'd been driving around town in a BMW that Daniel had unknowingly purchased. When Daniel confronted her, Sienna didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. Instead, she laughed. "What did you expect?" she said, packing her designer bags with clothes he'd bought her. "You cheated on your pregnant wife to be with me. Did you really think I was going to be faithful to you? You taught me exactly what kind of person you are, Daniel. I just learned the lesson." And just like that, she was gone. Back to Stanford to finish her senior year, with enough money and designer goods to live comfortably while she figured out her next move. The media, which had loved the story of the brilliant young CEO and his gorgeous girlfriend, had a field day with the breakup, especially when the embezzlement allegations came to light. Daniel's company board was furious. Investors started asking questions about his judgment. His reputation, which had taken years to build, was damaged overnight. At his lowest point, alone in his penthouse, facing potential legal action from his own company, watching his professional reputation crumble, Daniel did what so many men do when their lives fall apart. He went looking for the woman he'd thrown away. But first, he made the mistake of checking social media. And there, posted just that morning, was a photo that stopped him cold. Jessica stood on a stage at the Women's Leadership Summit, wearing an elegant white suit that made her look like the queen she'd always been. Beside her, in a matching white dress, was Hope, now 2 years old, beautiful and confident, holding her mother's hand like she knew she was exactly where she belonged. The caption, posted by the summit organizers, read, "Keynote speaker Jessica Price and her daughter Hope, reminding us all that you don't lose queens. You fail to recognize them." The post had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments from women calling Jessica an inspiration, a role model, a queen. And Daniel sat in his empty penthouse, scrolling through comment after comment from people who clearly had no idea that this amazing woman had ever been married to anyone, let alone him. That's when it hit him. Jessica hadn't just moved on, she'd evolved into someone so far beyond who she'd been when they were married that he was literally looking at a different person. A better person. A person who'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and used it as fuel to become extraordinary. And he'd missed all of it. Because he'd been too busy playing house with a college student who'd seen him as nothing more than a sugar daddy with a good credit score. If this story is hitting you in the feels, make sure to subscribe because we're about to get to the part where Daniel realizes exactly what he lost, and what Jessica does when he tries to get it back. Hit that notification bell because trust me, you don't want to miss the conclusion of this story. My question for you. Have you ever had someone from your past try to come back into your life after they realized what they'd given up? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. Daniel's first attempt to reconnect was pathetic. And I mean that in the most literal sense. It was worthy of pity, but not the kind of pity that makes you want to help someone. The kind that makes you embarrassed for them. He sent flowers. Not just any flowers, 2 dozen white roses, Hope's birth flower, with a card that said, "I made a terrible mistake. Can we talk?" Jessica threw them away without reading the card. Her assistant mentioned that they were beautiful, and asked if they were from someone special. "No," Jessica replied without looking up from her work. "Just someone who's confused about what century he's living in." When the flowers didn't work, Daniel tried emails. Long, rambling messages about how sorry he was, how he'd been going through a midlife crisis, how Sienna had manipulated him, how he'd never stopped thinking about Jessica and Hope. He talked about wanting to be a father to his daughter, about how they could be a family again, about how much he'd learned and grown. Jessica read the first one and deleted the rest without opening them. She'd learned something important in the past 3 years. A man's regret is not a woman's responsibility to fix. But Daniel was nothing if not persistent. Or maybe desperate is a better word. He started showing up at her events. Not making a scene, not trying to cause drama, just appearing. In the back of conference rooms when she was giving presentations. At charity galas where she was being honored. At the coffee shop near her house where she sometimes worked on weekends. Always at a respectful distance. Always well-dressed and polite. Always with the look of a man who was trying to figure out how to approach a wild animal without scaring it away. The first time Jessica saw him at one of her events, her stomach dropped. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she realized she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no residual love or attraction. Just nothing. Like seeing a stranger who happened to share some DNA with her daughter. That's when she knew she'd truly moved on. When the sight of the man who'd once been the center of her universe registered as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The confrontation, when it finally came, happened at the Children's Hospital fundraiser where Jessica was being honored for her work supporting single mothers. She'd just finished her acceptance speech, a beautiful talk about resilience, about building something meaningful from the ashes of disappointment, about the responsibility we all have to lift each other up. Daniel was waiting by her car when she came out. "Jessica?" he said, and his voice was different. Smaller. Unsure. "You were incredible in there. You've always been incredible. I needed to tell you that." Jessica looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 3 years. He was still handsome, still successful looking in his expensive suit and perfect haircut. But there was something hollow about him now, something desperate that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," she said simply, unlocking her car. "Can we talk? Please? I know I don't deserve it, but—" "You're right," Jessica interrupted gently. "You don't deserve it. But I'll give you 5 minutes because Hope is going to ask about her father someday, and I want to be able to tell her I gave you every opportunity to be the man she deserves." They sat in her car in the parking garage, and Daniel poured out 3 years of regret in 5 minutes. He talked about how wrong he'd been, how Sienna had been a mistake, how he'd never stopped loving Jessica, how he wanted to be a family again. When he finished, Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "Daniel," she said finally, "do you know what Hope's favorite book is?" He looked confused. "No, It's The Little Engine That Could." "Do you know what her favorite food is? What is she afraid of? What makes her laugh? Do you know that she's been asking why some kids have daddies who pick them up from school and she doesn't? Do you know that I've been preparing for that conversation for 2 years because I knew eventually you'd show up wanting to play father?" Daniel's face crumpled. "I can learn. You can learn about your daughter, yes. And you should. But you can't learn your way back into my life. We're building something here, Hope and I. Something beautiful and strong and stable. You walked away from that. We kept walking." "But I love you," Daniel said, and for the first time, his voice broke. "I never stopped loving you." Jessica turned to look at him, and when she spoke, her voice was kind but absolutely final. "Love isn't a feeling, Daniel. It's a choice. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, you choose to love someone or you choose yourself. For years, I chose you. Even when you were distant, even when you were prioritizing work over family, even when you were starting to pull away, I chose you. And you chose a 21-year-old intern." She paused, watching him absorb the weight of what she was saying. "I don't doubt that you have feelings for me. But love? Real love? That's what I do every morning when I wake up and choose to be the best mother I can be for Hope. That's what I do when I build a career that will give her security and independence. That's what I do when I show her that a woman's worth isn't determined by whether a man chooses to stay or go." Daniel was crying now, not caring about his expensive suit or his dignity or who might see him. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he whispered. "But I'm begging you. Please, let me try to make this right." "You want to make something right?" Jessica asked. "Be a father to Hope. Not because it might get you back into my good graces, but because she deserves to know the man who helped create her. Set up a college fund. Show up for school events. Be consistent and reliable and kind. Prove to her that just because someone leaves doesn't mean they stop caring. And us." Jessica smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful thing Daniel had ever seen. "There is no us, Daniel. There's you, there's me, and there's Hope. That's the family structure now. You can be part of Hope's life if you're willing to do the work to earn that privilege. But you and I? We're co-parents at best. I'm not interested in being your second choice again. That night, Daniel sat in his penthouse, the same penthouse he'd moved Sienna into within a month of leaving his pregnant wife, and faced the truth that successful men are rarely forced to confront. He had lost the best thing that ever happened to him, and it was entirely his own fault. But more than that, he'd lost something he was only now beginning to understand. He hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost a partner who'd believed in him before anyone else did. He'd lost a woman who'd supported his dreams when they were just dreams. He'd lost someone who'd loved him not for what he could provide or how he made her look, but for who he was at his core. He'd lost a queen. And he'd traded her for someone who'd seen him as nothing more than a wallet with legs. The realization broke him in ways that losing his company couldn't, in ways that Sienna's betrayal couldn't, in ways that public humiliation couldn't. Because this loss was preventable. This loss was his choice. Meanwhile, 6 months after that conversation in the parking garage, Jessica was standing on another stage at another event, making an announcement that would change lives. She was launching the Hope Foundation, a fund specifically designed to support single mothers who wanted to start their own businesses. Not charity, not handouts, but investment. Seed funding, mentorship, business development support, networking opportunities. Everything she'd learned building her own career from the ground up, she was now offering to other women who found themselves starting over. This foundation isn't named after my daughter because I think she's special, Jessica told the crowd of investors, business leaders, and media representatives. It's named Hope because that's what we give each other when we refuse to let our circumstances define our possibilities. Every woman who's ever been told she's not enough, every mother who's ever had to choose between her dreams and her responsibilities, every person who's ever had to rebuild their life from scratch, you are the reason this foundation exists. The Hope Foundation raised $2.5 million in its first year. It supported 47 women-led startups. 12 of those businesses reached 7-figure revenues within 18 months. The foundation became a case study in business schools, a model for impact investing, and a beacon of hope for women across the country who thought their dreams had died when their marriages did. Jessica's story became legend in entrepreneurship circles. Not as the woman who was left by her CEO husband, but as the woman who built an empire from her own strength. She was featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at international conferences, courted by venture capital firms who wanted her to join their teams. And through it all, Hope grew up watching her mother change the world. Not with bitterness or revenge, but with grace and determination and an unshakable belief that the best way to heal from betrayal is to build something so beautiful that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Daniel did try to be a father to Hope. He set up the college fund, attended school events, took her for weekend visits to his penthouse that he'd redecorated to include a princess bedroom he was sure she'd love. Hope was polite to him, the way children are polite to adults they don't know well but have been taught to respect. She answered his questions, accepted his gifts, and allowed him to read her bedtime stories when she stayed over. But she never stopped asking when she could go home to mommy. Because here's what Daniel had failed to understand. Being a father isn't about biology or good intentions or even genuine love. It's about showing up, consistently, from the beginning. It's about being there for the midnight fevers and the first steps and the scraped knees and the bedtime fears. It's about being woven into the fabric of a child's daily life, not visiting from the outside like a well-meaning stranger. Hope had a father in every way that mattered. She had a mother who'd been both parents since birth, who'd created a life so full of love and stability and possibility that Daniel's presence, while welcome, wasn't necessary for her happiness. And Daniel knew it. He could see it in the way Hope's face lit up when Jessica walked into a room, in the way she ran to her mother for comfort when she was hurt, in the way she unconsciously mimicked Jessica's mannerisms and expressions. He could see that he was an accessory to Hope's life, not a central figure, and that this was the natural consequence of his choices. 5 years after he'd left his pregnant wife for a college intern, Daniel Price finally understood what he'd lost. He'd lost a woman who would have supported his dreams for the rest of his life. He'd lost a partner who would have celebrated his successes and helped him weather his failures. He'd lost the chance to raise his daughter from birth, to be her hero instead of her occasional visitor. Most devastatingly, he'd lost the opportunity to grow old with someone who'd chosen him not for what he could provide, but for who he was. Late at night, when the penthouse felt empty and cold, when the silence reminded him that he was alone by choice, Daniel would whisper the words that had become his confession and his curse. "I didn't lose a wife. I lost a queen." But Jessica had found something far more valuable than a king. She'd found herself. She'd discovered that her worth wasn't tied to someone else's recognition, that her happiness didn't depend on someone else's choices, that her crown had never belonged to anyone but her. And in teaching Hope to be strong, independent, and uncompromising in her standards, Jessica had ensured that her daughter would never make the mistake of thinking she needed someone else's validation to know her worth. This story isn't about revenge, because queens don't seek revenge. They simply build kingdoms so magnificent that everyone who once dismissed them is forced to acknowledge what they lost. Daniel Price chose lust over loyalty, novelty over commitment, excitement over stability. And in doing so, he lost the only woman who'd ever seen his potential and loved him enough to help him reach it. Jessica Price chose dignity over destruction, grace over bitterness, and her own worth over someone else's validation. And in doing so, she discovered that she didn't need a king to be a queen, she'd been royalty all along. The last time I checked, 5 years after this story began, Jessica's consulting firm had grown into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The Hope Foundation had supported over 300 women-led businesses and had expanded internationally. Jessica herself had been named one of Forbes' most powerful women in business, and had turned down 3 different offers to run major corporations because she preferred building her own empire to managing someone else's. Hope, now 7 years old, speaks 3 languages, plays piano, and has already announced that she wants to be a businesswoman like Mommy when she grows up. She sees her father every other weekend, and their relationship is cordial but distant. Daniel provides financial support and tries to be present, but he's essentially a well-meaning uncle in his own daughter's life. Daniel's company recovered from the Sienna scandal, but he never recovered from losing Jessica. He dates occasionally successful women closer to his own age now, women who won't tolerate the kind of behavior that destroyed his marriage. But according to mutual friends, he's never gotten serious with anyone. How do you move forward when you know you already met and lost the love of your life? Here's what this story teaches us about the true nature of consequences. When you betray someone who genuinely loved you, you don't just lose them. You lose the person you could have become with their support. You lose the life you could have built together. You lose the version of yourself that existed in their eyes, the version that was worthy of unconditional love. But when you choose dignity in the face of betrayal, when you refuse to let someone else's failure to recognize your worth diminish your own sense of value, when you use your pain as fuel to build something beautiful, you discover that you were never half of anything. You were always whole. Jessica's story resonates with millions of women because it represents a different kind of strength. Not the strength that comes from fighting back, but the strength that comes from walking away. Not the power that comes from destroying someone who hurt you, but the power that comes from building something so magnificent that their absence becomes irrelevant. She didn't win by making Daniel lose. She won by refusing to let his choices define her possibilities. And in the end, that's the most devastating thing you can do to someone who underestimated you. Not prove them wrong through destruction, but through creation. Not by tearing down their new life, but by building something so beautiful in your own life that they realize what they threw away. Daniel Price thought he was upgrading his life when he left his pregnant wife for a younger woman. Instead, he downgraded himself from king to court jester in his own story. He went from being loved by a queen to being used by someone who saw him as nothing more than a credit card with feelings. And Jessica? She went from being an unappreciated wife to being a celebrated entrepreneur, from being someone's second choice to being her own first priority, from being half of a failing marriage to being the whole foundation of a thriving family. The button Daniel pressed wasn't just divorce. It was self-destruct. And he's been living in the aftermath of that explosion ever since. But Jessica didn't just survive the blast, she used the rubble to build a castle. That's the difference between a woman who knows her worth and a man who mistakes a crown for a costume. That's the difference between someone who chooses love and someone who chooses lust. That's the difference between a person who builds others up and a person who tears them down to make themselves feel bigger. You don't lose queens. You fail to recognize them. And once they walk away and build their own kingdoms, once they realize they never needed your validation to wear their crowns, once they discover that their power was never dependent on your presence, that's when you understand what you've lost. But by then it's too late. Because queens don't look backward. They're too busy building forward. And that was the real crown. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, if it showed you that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, I need you to subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell because we tell stories here that don't just entertain, they transform. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own power. Share it with someone who's going through their own betrayal and needs to see that there's life, beautiful, abundant, magnificent life, on the other side of heartbreak. And here's my final question for you. What would you do if someone who'd left you came back wanting a second chance? Would you take them back, or would you show them who you'd become without them? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Remember, you are not half of anything. You are not someone's backup plan. You are not a consolation prize. You are a queen with or without a king. Act like it. Until next time, keep building your kingdom.